has become irrelevant. Post-truth circumstances have become an abiding feature of the COVID-19 pandemic, with unprecedented levels of misinformation and data suppression and distortion of narratives. Taylor Shelton calls it a post-truth pandemic because, quote, government officials are responsible for willfully obfuscating the reality of the virus and its impact on people and actively intervening to prevent damaging but still very much factual information from being released to the public, unquote. During the second wave of the pandemic, when hospitals across India were struggling to supply oxygen to COVID patients, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath asked officials to take action under the National Security Act and seize the property of individuals who spread rumors and propaganda on social media to try to spoil the atmosphere. In other words, the UP Chief Minister implied that alarming numbers of hospitals running out of beds and oxygen cylinders were nothing but rumors. While the Indian government faced criticism from international media for its handling of the COVID crisis, there were reports that the government had ordered social media sites such as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to block posts that criticize management of the renewed nationwide public health crisis brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. In March 2021, a 97-page report of the group of ministers on government communication gave detailed measures that the government should adopt for, quote, a focused media strategy whose emphasis should be on setting the narrative, unquote. In other words, the central government was concerned about influencing media narratives such that negative reports critical about the government can be controlled. According to the website of the Prime Minister, Prime Minister emphasized that it was important to tackle the spread of pessimism, negativity, and rumor mongering. Citizens need to be assured that the government is committed to countering the impact of COVID-19. As a result of this media interaction, news coverage about the pandemic was affected, thereafter containing little mention of the poor planning and disastrous implementation of the lockdown or the government's failure to prepare for the pandemic, such as by stockpiling crucial medical equipment for healthcare, despite early warnings by the World Health Organization. A Brookings Institute study in July 2021 reported that discussions related to COVID-19 were at the lowest ebb on the eve of the second wave of the pandemic, unquote. The most alarming aspect of the Indian government imposing media censorship is revealed in a report entitled India Media's Crackdown During COVID-19 Lockdown by the Rights and Risks Analysis Group. Quote, about 55 journalists faced arrest, registration of FIRs, summons or show cause notices, physical assaults, alleged destruction of properties, and threats for reportage on COVID-19 or exercising freedom of opinion and expression during the nationwide lockdown from 25th March to 31 May 2020, unquote. In fact, even the Editors Guild of India stated in May 2020 that, quote, it notes with concern a growing pattern of misuse of criminal laws to intimidate journalists in different parts of the country. Therefore, Taylor Shelton's conceptualization of a post-truth pandemic and its applicability to the experience of the pandemic in India is illustrated by these examples of the government imposing surveillance and censorship upon the media in an effort to mute criticism of the inadequacy of governmental pressures to stem the crises of the pandemic. Overweening efforts were made to present a distorted perception about the gravity of the pandemic, even though the uncertainty of the pandemic and the enforced lockdown called for greater levels of accountability and transparency. Misinformation, fake news, and confirmation bias. Another prominent feature of the pandemic is the rise of fake news and misinformation. Axel Gelfert defines fake news as the, quote, deliberate presentation of typically false or misleading claims as news, where the claims are misleading by design, unquote. The Waddell-Daraksha framework of information disorder avoids using the term fake news because of its lack of definitional rigor, ambiguity in usage, and appropriation by politicians to impose restrictions on critical media and the free press. This framework distinguishes between three kinds of information disorder, and I'm still quoting the Waddell-Daraksha framework: disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. So these are the three kinds of misinformation the three kinds of information disorder which has been conceptualized by by the Waddell-Daraksha framework. So they define disinformation as information that is false and deliberately created to harm a person, social group, organization, or country. Misinformation, that is information that is false, but not necessarily created with the intention of causing harm. And malinformation, information that is based on reality, used to inflict harm on a person, organization, or country. Following this conceptualization, Samuel Spice defines disinformation as a rhetorical strategy, quote, a rhetorical strategy that produces and disseminates false or misleading information in a deliberate effort to confuse, influence, harm, mobilize, or demobilize a target audience. In fact, the Pew Research Center, in one of its reports, has said, quote, the seemingly unstoppable manipulation of public perception, emotion, and action via online disinformation, lies, and hate speech, deliberately weaponized in order to propagate destructive biases and fears, is one of the disturbing realities of the new normal that will prevail in 2025, unquote. Another Pew Research study remarks that fake news preys on some of our deepest human instincts and that manipulative actors will use new digital tools to take advantage of humans' inbred preference for comfort and convenience and their craving for the answers they find in reinforcing echo chambers. A study on the anatomy of news consumption on Facebook. This is the name of the study, an anatomy of news consumption on Facebook. It uses quantitative analysis to demonstrate, quote, the more active a user is, the more the user tends to focus on a small number of news sources. And despite the wide availability of content and heterogeneous narratives, there is major segregation and growing polarization in online news consumption, unquote. In other words, an increase in social media activity does not necessarily lead to the user visiting alternative accounts that may impel her to alter her beliefs or revisit personal opinions. On the contrary, because of the verisimilitude of fake news passing off as real news, social media users display a preference for narratives which appeal to existing views and prejudices, thereby forming a confirmation bias. Thus, the credibility and popularity of fake news is boosted by confirmation bias, or colloquially known as my side bias. The bias which is confirmed by reading narratives which already confirm what you already know. So that in your head, you can say that, okay, this news supports my side. That's why it's called my side bias. My side bias, or confirmation bias, defined by U. Peters as people's tendency to search for information that supports their beliefs and ignore or distort data contradicting them. Raymond S. Nickerson defines confirmation bias as, quote, seeking or interpreting of evidence in ways that are partial to existing beliefs, expectations, or a hypothesis in hand. One other article talks about the confirmation bias as sometimes the difference between real and fake news, fake information is apparent. However, often a message is written to invoke certain emotions and opinions by taking partially true-based stories and injecting false information, such that the information looks realistic. In addition, the perception of the trustworthiness of news is often influenced by confirmation bias. Therefore, people believe distorted or outright incorrect news and spread such misinformation further. Another review on the literature of fake news by Edson C. Tandock says that fake news derives its power, quote, from its appeal to partisanship, perceived novelty, and repeated exposure facilitated by both bots and human users that share them in the online space. And that while fact-checking has also risen in response to fake news, studies have found that corrections to wrong information do not work on all individuals. Disinformation and Islamophobia during the pandemic. The preceding accounts of the propagation of disinformation, circulation of fake news as evidence of confirmation bias, as well as government censorship of news reports in an attempt to control the severity of perceptions regarding the pandemic, is important to understand the patterns of Islamophobia that emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic in India. Now, as we all know, during the first wave of the pandemic in India, there were a lot of media narratives which were circulated using social media, hashtags such as Corona Jihad or Bio Jihad, which accused an organization called the Tablighi Jamaat and its gathering in Nizamuddin in Delhi to for propagating propagating the coronavirus. And while there is data, there are reports to suggest that yes, because of the gathering, there were some members who did contract COVID. But the systematic way in which there was a sustained narrative in the media, on TV channels, on Twitter, everywhere in social media, that it is this gathering itself, that it's the Tablighi Jamaat gathering itself, which is responsible for the mass spread of COVID in India. That was an example of disinformation. And the reason why I have quoted the Wattle Darakshana framework earlier is because they have defined disinformation as information that is false and deliberately created to harm a person, social group, organization, or country. So, what was known as Corona Jihad or Bio Jihad during the first wave of the pandemic was a definite example of disinformation and fake news. And by that token, we witnessed a rise of Islamophobia uh, during the pandemic, when Muslims were accused, and there were many fake news of Muslims spitting on food, of defecating in the open, of disrobing in front of hospital staff or nurses, and Muslims were seen as thwarting the attempts of the social collective in India, the social political collective, of thwarting the efforts of the social political collective in defeating the coronavirus. So Muslims were seen as, the normal, as Giorgio Agamben has said in his book, in his recent book on the pandemic, that in previous narratives, we have seen how individuals can be labeled as terrorists, and therefore whole societies, whole communities can be surveilled or stereotyped because they are associated with narratives of terrorism or in the war on terror. Similarly, of course, Agamben does not refer to India in his book, but Agamben's similarity of accusing people of spreading terror and accusing people of spreading COVID can be very well applied to Islamophobic narratives of Corona Jihad, which was seen in the first wave of the pandemic. So this is an example of COVID being literally, the pandemic being an example of post-truth pandemic, what I spoke about in the beginning of my paper. And of course, there are also examples of misinformation being spread. And according to the Wattle Darakshana framework, misinformation is information that is false, but not created deliberately with the intention of causing any harm. So there were many examples of misinformation also. For example, there were news reports which said that drinking Gaumutra will cure you of COVID. And there were examples to show a lot of semi-scientific, or we can even say anti-scientific cures were suggested on social media. There were a lot of alarmist narratives about the spread of coronavirus. There were even many accusatory statements about how COVID is a conspiracy by China, etc. So all this was an example of misinformation, but this was not, of course, unique to India. I think the entire world was in the grip of what Taylor Shelton has called a post-truth pandemic, where misinformation was rife in the age of the pandemic. But disinformation as an example of the information disorder, and Corona Jihad as an example of fake news and disinformation, was specifically seen in India. That's all. That's my paper. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. What we can do is to have the second presentation also, and then open it up for discussion if that's the model that you have been following, all of you. So if that's okay, then may I ask the next presenter to begin?
Okay, ma'am, surely. Hello, am I audible?
Sure. Yeah, I can hear you clearly. I hope others can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Srajan Maheshwari, and I will like to make a presentation here, and I will be sharing a PowerPoint slides here. And I hope if there is any glitch or anything lag in my voice, please remind me or tell me regarding the same. So right now I'm sharing the same. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please Go on, go
Okay.
on.
Is the screen is visible?
Yes, it's visible. Yes.
Okay. 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 So, as it is already discussed about the post-truth era, my focus is on elections and pandemic, and how the misinformation is regarding in elections are changing the voting behavior of constituencies within Indian states. So basically, my work is focused on elections and how that in this post-truth era, does it really impact the voting behavior? This is actually my presentation. So I will go through the introduction, objective, timeline, and the factors that is involved, the methodology of the analysis, and I have cited four elections from West Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, and one election of Union Territory of Puducherry. Then I will give some results and findings, and finally I will give my conclusion. So basically, the civic republicanism that has been increasingly challenged during the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a lot of unique behavior and socio-spatial stresses across constituency within respective states. The purpose of this study is to analyze basically the effect of misinformation in pandemic, particularly on the voting behavior of assembly constituencies. And these assembly constituencies have different graded inequalities, as it is said by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. My objective is to provide a best possible procedural solution, and what can be the qualitative check that can be provided through the misperception of norms, which can be channeled via political cybernetics that has been clearly described by Carl Dweck in his book The Nerves of Government. So before starting forward on India, I would just like to have a brief discussion on worldwide trends. So basically, my data is from February 2020 to February 2022. There are at least 80 countries and territories across the globe which have actually postponed their national or subnational election due to COVID-19. However, at least 130 countries or have done their national and subnational elections during COVID-19 wave. And out of those 80 countries, at least 65 countries and territories have held their elections, which was postponed during the first wave. Now, trends in India. Basically, India was particularly more affected by the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic, during which my study is basically based, in which four assembly elections, Assam, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Union Territory of Puducherry, the assembly election takes place. And my study is basically focused in the time period, the time frame of March 2021 to May 2021, in which these elections were held. In India, during the first wave, there are some elections like Rajya Sabha election, which was an indirect election, which was supposed to held in 26 March 2020, was moved to 19th June 2020. There was some postpone of election of Gram Panchayat in Karnataka and Maharashtra, and also in Rajasthan, about around 129 urban local body elections were shifted. Now, as I said, my study is on data set from March 2021 to May 2021. As you can see, the graph, the figure one, this is the figure which is cited from prsindia.org website. The bell curve can be certainly seen why the need or the reason of how those elections are being held in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, how misinformation is being targeted, or why it is important to realize in these elections, is being focused by the primaries which I have resulted here is as voter turnout and the vernacular language newspaper. The graph which has been presented here is taken from the source from Broadcast Audience Research Council 2020. As we can see, here are three major states where my studies focus is SME, West Bengal, and Tamil Nadu, where there is a frequent and a large number of vernacular newspaper that can be seen. So my study is going to be here in these particular elections. This is just a graphical information where misinformation could be more appropriately dealt with, where vernacular newspaper languages or newspaper digital media is there. Now, here comes the methodology and the analysis. So this is my methodology is basically a simple linear regression model where I have taken the number of cases as the independent variable, which is X, which can be C, and the voter turnout remains a dependent variable. So basically, my whole result and findings and discussion will be based on whether the number of cases is making the Y change or the voter turnout change, depending on the misinformation in this post-truth world. Do it really change? How the interpretation is being done is based on the value of R square, which is the coefficient of determination. This is basically if its effective value remains less than zero point 0.5, that means the dependent variable, that is the number of cases of COVID-19, is very less chance to make affect the dependent variable, that is the voter turnout. So this is basically the simple linear model. I have taken the sample size of n number of districts for each state. So there are 4 states and 1 union territory. So I have taken the number of districts as a method where the number of cases can be extrapolated around it. So this is basically a West Bengal election. Data is from Election Commission of India report of India, and this is particular the graph where the final result has been taken. This is taken from the website from Times of India. So as you can see, this is basically a simple regression model, and the red ones are the voter turnout of 2016, and the blue ones are the voter turnout of 2021. So we can a simple regression model has been done, and the R square, which is the
Sorry, I'm
sorry.
sorry to interrupt, but I am unable to see the PowerPoint presentation. I can just see, a contents page on your laptop. I don't know if it's a problem with everyone, but I
It's
am
the
unable
same
to see.
thing. Oh my God. I thought that everybody else could see it, and that's why I didn't say anything.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think you've opened your PowerPoint. You've just clicked on your computer, so you need to open it,
I
please.
thought there was some, because I've come on through my browser. I thought there was, therefore I don't have access to some features and I can't see his presentation.
I actually told if there is any issue, please let me remind at the beginning of the
Yeah,
presentation.
I think everybody thought the problem was only with their screen, Srajan.
Just a second. I just make it clear at the starting of the presentation. Just a second.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can take us through your slides very quickly now that we are just seeing them for the first time. So until the current slide.
Okay. I think there's a connection issue. Is it visible now?
Yes,
Hello.
it's visible. Yeah, it's visible. Yes.
Just kindly just remind me if it is changing or not. Is it changing? Slides are changing.
I can see a West Bengal Assembly election with the Bengal map in green and
Yeah, you
orange.
can see that, na? Right. Okay.
Yeah, just that. Yeah.
Just a minute. Is it visible now?
Now it is. Yes.
Okay. I'm going through it a bit faster then. So this is basically a regression model where the red are the voter turnout in 2016 and the blue are the 2021 election. So as I said, I'll just repeat a bit R square is basically the coefficient of determination, which is if it is less than 0.5, then it means that the dependent variable, which is basically y on the independent variable, which is basically number of cases of COVID-19, has a very slight chance that it will affect the voter turnout. Now the R square, there is a particular calculation how R square is being calculated. So this is hello. Is it visible?
Yes, you are
Hello.
visible. Visible. Yes,
Okay,
it's
okay.
visible.
So okay. So this is the R square is 0.328, which is less than 0.5. So basically, it just suggests that how voter turnout is independent of basically uh, uh, the number of cases of COVID-19, and this is and on pointing out the misinformation part, how it affects basically in West Bengal. If I may say that there is I have make analysis on what are the wireless connection per 100 in West Bengal is around 62, and the rural to urban ratio is around 8 to 5. So misinformation do plays a part in making a political heterogeneity, which we can see in the peripheral region here, which we can see the secondary party alliance has been able to win. But in the core region, which is like North 24 Parganas district, which is the most populated district of West Bengal, there is basically nothing more happen other than decrease in vote margin. So though in West Bengal, basically what my conclusion remains that misinformation do play a part, but it doesn't play a part in making the significant change in finally winning the primary party election. Now I will go through assembly elections of Assam. Okay. So the Assam assembly election, as we can see, the coefficient of determination is 0.004. I would just like to have this information that 0.004, this means that around 0.04% of the dependent variable, that is the confirmed cases, lies with the voter turnout. That means around more than 99% of the voter turnout are completely independent of the COVID-19 number of cases that has been seen in Assam, basically. Regarding misinformation, I analyzed on 24.72 million wireless connection, where the rural to urban ratio was 6 to 9. And here the same conclusion was drawn, which is near the Bodoland area, which is actually a very affected area. Naxalite issues are there, which we can see the political heterogeneity is more prominent, other than where the secondary alliance were able to win the election, while the primary alliance still, which is near the Nagaon district, which is the most populated district in Assam, is not able to make any dent on the primary on the secondary alliance. Now I am going to Tamil Nadu election. Here again same, the coefficient of distribution is about 0.3, that is around 3.1% of things of the cases that affect the voter turnout. Again, it's the basically the voter turnout has no effect because of the number of cases and the misinformation. There are around 82.76 million wireless connection, and we can see that the primary party, which is currently the winning party, has no effect in the peripheral regions of the Tamil Nadu, which is basically Coimbatore and the Erode region, though has a it has an effect in culturally conservative region of Tiruchirappalli and Madurai region. Finally, Kerala, here the coefficient of determination is around 0.4%, which is again which less, and there is nothing much of effect of dependent variable of number of cases on voter turnout. Though there are cases where the sitting chief minister have make allegation against the secondary alliance of manufacturing the campaigns during the elections. So as I said in the West Bengal election, the misinformation part during the election in the pandemic can affect the vote margin between the primary and the secondary alliance, but there is nothing sort of change in the finally primary who is winning the election. Now finally is the Puducherry election. So here with the R square is nearly zero. There is no effect. The regression line is completely parallel to the y-axis, and there is nothing which we can see. So the more the smaller the area, the more diverse, the less the diverse the area, there is highly less chance of affecting misinformation on particularly on the election result. So my conclusion and finding is basically is that the overall political effect on political participation seems to be affected by the political communication, uh, but but there is a big but that the immediate effect on winning these political parties is very less, as I said, and the secondary impact of post-truth in this post-truth era is the vote market. So it could have a dent on the primary alliance, but not on the final result of the election. Now, what are the various things that has been going on are the collaboration of various multinational corporations like Twitter, Facebook with Election Commission of India, as well as certain civil societies like Association of Democratic Reforms. Now, these are basically focused on four languages, primarily English, Hindi, Tamil, and Bengali, where these elections are held, and they worked upon on the Gabriel Almond four sub variables, which I found particularly helpful to analyze these particular findings, which is the requirement of homogeneity of political information, the mobility of information, volume of information, and the directional nature of the information. Though there are certainly limitation of this particular study because this is a simple regression model, and it is based on digital precipitation, not actual field misinformation. So these are certain limitations. And finally, I would like to conclude that that misinformation are tend to play more role. This is actually surprising to tend to play more role in urban areas rather than in rural areas. So it is found that as a general convention that the rural area this could be more affected because there is less literacy. And even though in areas like West Bengal where the huge participation via wireless subscriber base in West Bengal is very high, so we can see that though it can play a part, but on the other hand, how it can playing a part when the voter is going to vote on election, especially based on urban areas, not the rural area, and especially on the more densely populated district area. The least advantaged group do have an impact on voting choices, as I said, but on urban areas, not on rural areas. Political ideologies in these during COVID-19 pandemic, from my study, it doesn't have a various proposition on the on the final result uh, of the study. And finally, I would like to conclude by yeah. Finally, I would like to conclude that yes. The need is of the categorical imperative nature of the access to our information and self-ruling conscious citizen, and which can be helpful for making India a more self-reliant. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Unmute myself. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Srajan. Thank you, Heba. My thanks to the presenters. I'm sorry because of poor internet and my own unfamiliarity with this interface portal, etc. It took me quite a while to get back, and I barely heard Heba's presentation. In fact, I think I got back into the meeting just as she was summing up and wrapping up, and so I'm sorry for that. I'm going to open it up for discussion now and for question answers. Any thoughts, reflections, comments that any of you might have for the presenters? Doesn't have to be a question, can also be, you can also reflect on the pandemic and misinformation, this whole contagion of misinformation, disinformation, post-truth, untruth, all of that you have witnessed perhaps in your cities, in your towns, in your places of residence that you've heard of, and something that either of the speakers said today may have sparked off that thought, feel free to air it.
Ahmed, you can go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Mohammed
So-
Sadiq, yes, please go
Yeah.
on, please.
I just have a question. It was not clear, like how misinformation affected on these elections. Maybe I might have missed this PPTs on the first two slides. So could you please explain how misinformation affected on these elections? Second thing, in the conclusion, you said that in urban areas, misinformations create more issues than the rural area. So how did you reach in that conclusion as well?
We can take another question and then over to the presenters for their responses. So after Sadiq's question, is there anybody else who has a question?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Srajan. Yeah, this is to Sadiq question, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
go on, Srajan. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Sadiq. I'm just sharing sharing my PPT if it is visible. I don't know the connection issue, but how the conclusion was basically reached is if you saw my presentation. Most of the urban regions are normally in the area where the primary alliance have won the election. So, for example, in West Bengal, the current incumbent government, such as in area in North 24 Parganas and Kolkata region, have swept the election. I would use the word swept there. But in peripheral region, which is basically the Asansol region, have won, which is actually a tribal belt, not the district Asansol, but near the border of Jharkhand, where basically the secondary primary alliance, which is the central government, have won the election. So my how it is affecting the misinformation part is the number of if you have read the presentation while I was giving, the number of cases that has been presented in the news are around Kolkata, Hooghly, and North 24 Parganas, not in those regions. So these are the reported cases, not the cases that has actually been founded on digital media. I hope it makes clear. That's how I reach those conclusions. And basically, I've also taken the rural to urban participation ratio. Hello.
Yes, anybody else? Would somebody else like to say something, ask something, reflect on something?
I hope I make my point clear. Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. If any question, I would love to answer.
Am I allowed to ask my fellow presenter? I don't know if it's
Of course,
as per
feel free, absolutely.
Sure, Heba. Sure.
Please,
Srajan,
please.
I'm just wondering, when you define misinformation, when
Yeah.
you use misinformation, how do you define it? Because there are many ways of defining and conceptualizing misinformation. So which model did you use? Because
So-
and how did this relate to elections? Because
So okay.
yeah.
At the starting of my presentation, sorry, I cannot share. I can share you on your mail. The issue I have taken is I have taken the very time bounded manner, which is from March 2021 to June to May 2021. So as you said in your presentation, there are disinformation, there is a misinformation, right? So there is not only pandemic, there is also an infodemic in sense. So what my definition of misinformation, as you rightly asked, is basically how it is affecting the voter. I clearly mentioned how is affecting the voter behavior. Because see, the most important thing is they are ruling our country, they are ruling our states. So my course of study or course of method of study is basically limited to the election part. So my study, how I defined, is if there is too much of changes in voter behavior via misinformation during COVID-19 pandemic, then I could make a very different conclusion, or may have a very different result. But there are very less chances on voting behavior, though, as I said in a conclusion, that it can have an effect on urban areas, as I said to the previous questionnaire. But it will have a very less effect on rural areas, and affect in the sense the final effect, not in the primary effect of sorry, the secondary effect during the result conclusion, as I would like to say that.
So I understand this is a Twitter study, right? Took your data from Twitter from these times, right? Within
Sorry.
these time limit, correct?
No. I have not taken the Twitter data. Actually, the
Okay.
data which see, the previous questionnaire that you asked was how I taken the misinformation data. So I took the misinformation data on the reported cases of misinformation of the fake news, right? So this is not a Twitter study. A Twitter study, basically, I have taken the Twitter conclusion, how it is helping the Election Commission of India in making the helpful, like voter education, voter participation, more representation, how various factors can influence elections. So Twitter was actually I was taking in a more positive side in this particular election, while I am taking misinformation here from the context of the reported cases of fake news, because that would be genuine, right? From the point, from the reference, from I'm seeing those.
So how you mind your data? I mean, this is just out of curiosity because
Okay. See.
as
So
in the
another
my
thing,
first
Srajan,
question, I
what is the
couldn't.
content of the misinformation? Because that is not
Yeah.
clear. So for example, drawing parallel to my presentation, the content of my disinformation were tweets, hashtags called Corona Jihad, or accusations in which Muslims are, accused of spitting or defecating in the open. So that is the content of misinformation. So if you could clarify that, what is the content of the misinformation in which you analyzed in your presentation? Yeah.
Okay. So I have seen. See, in your slide there was content of hashtags, right? Now I have taken a different form of it, which is in the form of the cases, the factors that, as I said to Sadiq, it is reported in the police station about fake news. To be very clear about it, about fake news. So how I link those fake news to the voter turnout, and I link those to the voter turnout, and I have a very secondary aspect to it, which are factors like rural and urban wireless connectivity of misinformation. And as I said, there is a limitation of my study, which was that I have taken the wireless subscriber base. I have not taken the newspaper analysis or anything like that. It's basically digital. It is completely digital in analysis. It's not it's not offline mode of checking. So the content or the information, as you are asking, are hashtag in your study. My form or my appearance in my study is basically the report or the number of cases of fake news that are reported in these or during these assembly elections. I've taken the speeches, as I've said, a word of manufactured campaign. It was taken by the incumbent chief minister of Kerala against the secondary alliance in Kerala. So I've taken these words, these misinformation factors, and I combine these factors with the voter turnout. Although as I've said, it is affecting vote margin, it is not affecting the final result or the final outcome. In COVID-19 pandemic, it was a matter of study that we can have a more further discussion if we can met. Sure, thank you.
So how did you get the data? Like, so you took it from Election Commission website, or
Yeah,
what is the
so
source
the
of your data?
data, the source of the data I mentioned there, it was Election Commission website, plus there are various from Center of Social CSDS data of Lokniti. If I can, there are other sources. I took it from Election Commission. I've actually worked in this particular field, so I've taken the data from there, and I've taken of previous data. There is some website called India Votes. There is also a website called India Votes. I've also taken data from there. And for misinformation data, which is the wireless subscriber based data, I have taken it from TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. I've taken that data from there. And the data of vernacular languages of newspaper, I've taken data from Broadcast Research Council. So these are the data points. I can we can share the more data points if it is allowed.
So yeah, so these are the data points on misinformations, right?
No, these are the data points on misinformation from TRAI. I would just reiterate myself. Misinformation data from TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. This for, sorry, not misinformation, the wireless connectivity. Misinformation data from the reported fake news from various websites, from various newspaper clips, from various speeches of the leaders, from and the data points for election voter turnout is I've taken from Election Commission website, from India Votes, and from for the number of cases of COVID-19. The data point which I have taken is from PRS India or One India. These are various data point collection websites. Misinformation basically from news outlets, speeches, or the comments that has been made by various political parties. And I've connected it from TRAI, Telecom Regulatory.
Excuse me, ma'am, you are muted. Your mic is muted.
Sorry. No, I was just thanking Srajan for his clarification and Sadiq for his question, Heba for her question and intervention. Would somebody else like to also say something about or respond? If there's or would Srajan, would you have a question for Heba? The presenters can always ask your co-presenters a question, or you can also reflect if you like. If not, if there isn't anything further from any of you, I'm just going to hand the session over back to Kripa Rose. Kripa, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
There seems to be no further interventions or questions from any of the participants. So what do we do? Do I hand it over back to you?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could give your comments on the whatever little you heard from my presentation, ma'am.
Heba, Heba, was that you?
Yes, ma'am, that was me. Yes.
Literally, I came into the meeting when I just heard you say disinformation, misinformation, and then you said, and this is the end of my presentation. I'll stop here. Thank you. That's literally when I came back, Heba. So I'm
so sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't had the time to look at the papers that were sent to me. I wasn't able to do that this weekend. I've been traveling a little bit. So I'm afraid I completely missed your presentation. But we did actually, just while I didn't listen to Heba's presentation, something that we did actually write as part of a team. We did a study on, as I said, COVID denial and COVID stigma. And one of the one of the dimensions of the denial that came through very pretty much strongly was what we criticized as being, for instance, in the months of March and April, almost right up to May of 2020, when the Tablighi Jamaat had their meeting in Delhi. There was a concerted effort by the central government, some state governments, and then, of course, many sections of the media and the civil society to make it appear as if the foreign nationals who had attended the Tablighi Jamaat meeting in Delhi were responsible for willfully propagating, were responsible for willfully spreading the virus, almost as if the entire meeting was held as with the intention of spreading the virus, and there was in fact even arrest at that point of time. So what we do in that paper is to say that that was also a form by which governments were trying to scapegoat. No, that's what we identify as scapegoating. So it was both scapegoating and vilifying Muslims, and in this case, Muslims who had visited in particular from outside the country, who had attended the convention of the Tablighi Jamaat in Delhi, but also this demonizing and vilifying, scapegoating, targeting was also served another purpose, which was to sort of deny community transmission, right? As if to say that the source of the infection, the source of the spread of the infection is others. You know, it's that whole othering process, right? So it is somebody else. In this case, very conveniently, it is Muslims who are also not Indians. And we point our fingers, therefore, outside in a manner that it deflects attention. It takes away attention. It completely so government is also in a form of denial of community transmission of COVID. Basically, COVID was spreading like wildfire during those months at the level of communities, towns, residences, panchayats. So this whole business of scapegoating, targeting, and finger pointing also served the purpose of deflecting attention from community transmission. So that's also one of the forms of COVID denial that we mapped at the level of, that is being propagated and practiced by the highest levels of government. So that was something that that struck me. I'm not sure if you reflected on that also as part of your presentation. So since I didn't hear it, but that was something that...
the name of this paper, COVID stigma and COVID denial. Tell me the name of this paper.
This paper has just come out in the EPW January of this year. It's COVID denial and stigma narratives from Tamil Nadu. EPW January 2022. It's S. Kriti, Kalpana, Karunakaran, Vester, Lydia, Sarathi, Sundaraman. There's about 4 or 5 of us. So that was, so that is just... if there's nothing else, I'm going to hand it over to Kripa. Kripa, over to you, Kripa.
Thank you, Professor Kalpana and panelists, for that insightful session. The valedictory ceremony proceedings will begin shortly at 5 p.m. Kindly stay with us. Thank you.